Today's lesson is about graphs. We're going to talk about what to include when you make a graph, how to decide what type of graph to make, and all of the items that you need to include when you make a graph. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how you know which type of graph to make. Usually your options are a bar graph or a line graph. Preferably, most things are going to be a line graph in high school, but every once in a while you have to make a bar graph. The only time you make a bar graph is if your data is not in a sequence, not sequential. This would include if you are graphing something like different brands of fertilizer, for example. But if you were looking at amounts of fertilizer, then you would make a line graph. The amount of fertilizer is a sequence. You have maybe 0, 10, 20, 30. You can line those up in a sequence. That tells you to make a line graph. If you have different brands or types of something or different cups of something, then you are going to use a bar graph. The next thing that we're going to talk about is what variable goes where. So when you have a graph, I'm going to show you an easy trick how to remember this. If you can remember the phrase dry mix, this tells you that the dependent variable is on the y-axis and the independent variable is on the x-axis. That is always the case with any graph that we do. Okay, so you want to make sure that you remember dry mix. The dependent variable goes on the y, the independent variable goes on the x. So let's look at our graph. Let's take a bar graph here, and we're going to do the brands of fertilizer. If I'm changing the brands of fertilizer, that means that is my independent variable. So that means that's going to go down here on our x-axis. And then what we're going to measure at the end is going to be the amount of growth, the height of the plants, and we are going to graph that. Let's say that's brand number 1, brand number 2, and brand number 3. What we're missing from this graph right now are units. So over here with the height of the plants, you need to indicate, was this measured in centimeters? Was it measured in inches? Was it measured in feet, meters? What are your units? So you always want to make sure that you have units on your axes. In this case, because we have different brands of fertilizer, we're going to label what those brands are, and that represents our unit over here. If we're making a line graph, it's going to look a little different than that. Again, we have dry mix. If I'm changing the amount of fertilizer this time, that is the thing that I changed. So I know it goes down here on my x-axis. So if this is my amount of fertilizer, let's say I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, I need units. What does 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 represent? Are they cups of fertilizer? Are they ounces of fertilizer? Is it grams of fertilizer? So I'm going to indicate that here, that it's grams of fertilizer. And then what am I measuring? What's my dependent variable? It's going to be the height or the growth of my plants. So again, maybe I've got 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and I'm going to say that is centimeters because I need units there. That's what I measured. And this is the kind of graph where we're going to plot some points. So a line graph, you're going to make dots. let's say that the plant that received 1 gram of fertilizer grew 10 centimeters tall. The plant that had 2 grams of fertilizer grew 15. 3 grams of fertilizer was 20. 4 grams of fertilizer was 25. And 5 grams was 30. And then we connect those. We make a line out of it. Let's say we have a second set of data. We have another trial that we did. So we're going to say that this is trial 1 is the black line. But let's say that another person in the class ran the same experiment, or I had a whole nother set. So I'm going to change color here. And let's say this is trial 2 with the green line. So maybe this time I have less, or I have this. Again, you're going to connect the dots to make a line out of your data. You can have as many lines as you need to represent each of the different trials that you have done. But again, each line you connect the dots separately. And when you have more than one set of data, you need to make sure you have one of these, which is a key to go with it. The only other thing that we are missing from this graph, we have our data, we have our labels, our units, label, units, we have a key, we need a title. So we're going to call this the effect of fertilizer on plant growth. Those are the key items that you need in every single graph. A title, your data, a key, your labels, and units. Another thing to make sure of, if you notice here, I went in even increments as I counted up. You don't use the numbers for your data to make those labels, to make the axes here. You're just going to count in a sequence. If my smallest number is 0 and my biggest number is 30, then I need to make sure that I have an even increment going from 0 to 30 on my graph. When you're looking at a graph that's already made for you, you need to make sure that you remember dry mix. This is going to help you identify, if I were to ask you in this particular graph, what is the independent variable and what is the dependent variable in a practice question or a quiz question, you're going to know that the x-axis is the independent variable and the y-axis is the dependent variable. So let's take a look at some practice problems here that you are going to be working on. You will be working on this particular worksheet here. And for this one, you have a sequence of data. So this is going to be a line graph. And you have trial 1, forest A, and forest B. So this is going to have 2 lines. You need 1 line for forest A and 1 line for forest B on your graph. So you're going to have a line graph. You're going to have 1 line representing forest A, and then you're going to have a second line representing forest B. Make sure you think about what's your dependent variable. That's going to go on this side here, your y, and your independent variable, the thing that you changed in the experiment or the thing the person changed in the experiment, is going to go on the x-axis. So that's one of the practice graphs that you're going to do. Second practice graph is right here. This time, same thing. We're going to make a line graph, but we have 3 different sets of data So we're going to have 3 lines on our graph that we need to make sure we have a key to label them. And I think that's about it.